This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. All right. Good morning, Kelly.
Morning, Ethan. How are things in the Northeast?
I'm doing all right. Not too bad. Little girl sick, but I'll get through it, you know?
Yeah, as long as she's getting through it, we're welcome to parenting. And it's never convenient.
No, that's for sure.
So,
yeah.
And I know it draws a lot of concern for the parents.
She can't tell you, what's really hurting her. She knows, her head and her stomach and all that. So I can say, like, is it your head that's hurting you? But I don't know if she really understands the full question.
Right.
So it's tough, you kind of feel helpless and you can't really, you want to help them and you can't. And so that's I think one of the toughest parts.
Yeah,
for sure.
That the issue comes in is define hurting. Right. If you're sick, you're not hurting, right? You just feel miserable, but you're not necessarily hurting. And
yeah,
it's hard. And she's what, 2 now?
Not even 2, but
not
even
close. 2. Yeah. So
yeah. I'm gonna sound like my dad here, but everyone needs a little green machine. Those Bissell little green machines. I don't know what I would do without it.
Take longer to clean stuff up.
I mean, some stuff you can't throw in the wash, so
yeah.
Like a mattress, because sometimes things leak through everything.
That's true.
All layers. It's a fun time.
There is no barrier that is 100% when you're talking about the fluids that come out of a child.
Oh yeah.
What do you got today? What's going on?
Well, I guess we'll stay on topic of parents. We've seen a couple different articles and videos here and there, and I think we just kind of want to quickly. This will kind of take place of our news segment, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of just want to quickly go over the role. Where does the role of the parent end, and where does and start, and where does the role of the school start and end? It seems that we're kind of more frequently seeing schools kind of overstepping that line a little bit.
Let's call it blurring that line.
Blurring the line. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a good way to say it.
Let's call it that. So the first part of that question is, where does the parent's role start and end? Yeah. And the answer to that, it never does.
Yeah, that's
right.
I figured I was asking a rhetorical
question there. Yeah. So it never does.
Yeah.
Unlike the school's role. Mm-hmm. And we talked about this, and I always mess this up because it's Latin and it's the parentis in loco or something like that. It means legally they have the right to act as the parent in the absence of the parent. Right? So.
And what does that mean, like, in absence of? Is just like the parent isn't there for the day, or like the parent isn't in the kid's life at all for whatever reason?
No, it's when they're in the custody of the school.
Okay, so this is a day-to-day.
Day-to-day, yep. So It has zero to do with the marital status of somebody. It has zero to do with the parental status. A teacher can't invoke that law or after school hours unless it's a sanctioned school event, right? The intent of that is the school is not required to consult with every decision that they make with every parent. you can see the issues there. Specifically,
Yeah, that kind of just opens
that blow up,
everything
right?
up.
Yep.
Yeah.
You couldn't do anything, right? You have to be able to work through some issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
But generally speaking, those issues are fairly low level. The issue is the expanded definition that we're seeing of what that means. The issue is created when they start making life choices or allowing a young child to make life choices without consenting the adults, the parents in the family. That's when we start seeing some issues. In this case, and we don't have the full story in a lot of these cases because they might have consulted with one parent but not the other in a case of a separation or a pending divorce or a divorce. And so those are issues that have to be resolved through court and so forth. Generally speaking, if you have two parents that are involved in a child, you should consult with both parents. And what we're really talking about was a district who allowed a child to change their identity and affirm their change in identity without consulting with the parents. The issue comes in what we see is in the video. It was a video clip that we saw, and we're purposely trying to leave the district name, the parties involved, their names out of it for a lot of reasons. But the bottom line is one parent, and it doesn't say their marital status, but there is some evidence that they're not together anymore. The accusation was that the school did this without consulting the parents. And then when they found out about it, they provided the school provided a bunch of resources to continue this therapy, doctor visits, other affirming type actions, I guess. I'm trying to choose my words carefully.
Yeah.
And what that ended up doing was driving a wedge between the two parents as to what had previously been an understanding to have a unified voice in the school environment.
Mm.
And so now you have a very angry parent addressing the school board and causing a lot of emotions within the school board meeting, saying things that you could say, look at, this is going to be a problem if they don't stop this. Because and during the playing of the video that you showed me, you asked a question. What was that question, if you remember?
I said, how far up the pathway of violence is this parent?
Well, we're talking about a school board and somebody who is emotionally addressing a school board meeting, the school board in general, and calling them out one by one, going through many of the actions that were taken by the school and or allowed by the school board or the school district, either by policy or positive affirmation of this process. The issue comes in is, how far up is he? Right? As safety people, we have to start looking at that. And, it was, for the most part, with the limited information that we have, is he on it? So let's take the first couple steps. Does he feel victimized?
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Does he have a grievance?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Does he have violent ideation, which is the third step?
Not quite. He didn't.
There's no evidence of that.
Yeah. There's
right?
no evidence of it.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's no evidence of it. But this is something that was caused by the school. When we talk about bullying, do you think that father who was speaking before the school board felt like he was being bullied.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Why do you
Because
think that?
it goes back to your definition of bullying is you're asserting power.
Power.
And in this instance, the school was asserting a power over him. So yeah,
Parental power over the
parental,
parent,
yeah, which is crazy.
which is crazy, right?
Uh,
So, you know, we talked in our last podcast about defining the undefinable.
mhm,
And we had two terms that we were going to address. We ended up only talking about one of them, and that was bullying.
mhm.
And the other part of that was mental health as a label or as a tag for a reason not to act or a reason to act. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Do you think that when we talk about a parent who feels like they've been bullied by the school district, the school itself, teachers within the schools, do you think that causes any mental health issues, emotional issues?
I mean, yeah. I mean, if I'm putting myself in his position, I mean, I'm gonna be livid. You know,
Live
like
it,
I'm gonna be pretty mad.
right?
So I mean, you're gonna be in this kind of constant state of just heightened, like just, I don't know, being angry all the time is just not a good place to be. You know,
It's not
it's just a recipe for probably doing things you shouldn't. Probably that's how I would
right.
define
So,
it.
one of the biggest actions that we can take as a school to help prevent bullying, victimization, and so forth is to create a positive environment, a positive, supportive school environment. One of the biggest factors in doing that, or steps that we should do, is create a trusted environment where students have a trusted adult that they can go to.
Do you think that schools that are, as we've defined it just here previously, of kind of blurring the line,
Mhm.
are they doing that in total honest approach of making a positive environment? Are they is it coming from a good place? I guess is my question. You know, are they doing it because they really want to make this kid's experience the best possible? I might be putting you on the spot there, but
No, no. So I'm going to go to a leadership perspective.
okay.
When we get up and we start walking through our day and we come into some conflict,
Hmm.
and we oftentimes we look at actions that are impacting what we do and we go to the negative right away, right? And from a leadership perspective, we really should be asked before we get emotional and respond to something. We really need to look at, do you think that somebody is really trying to do harm to this child? Or do you think they're coming from a better place and that they're trying to guide the child into something that they're naturally headed into, but you're just doing what you think is right?
I think it's coming from a good place, but I would also say it's not your place.
That's right. And it's certainly not your position or your place to do it without
Mm.
consulting the actual parents. But this is an example of people who are doing harm without intending to do so. I don't think there was somebody says, ho, 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 here, we got one. Let's do
Yeah, yeah,
this,
yeah.
which is sort of implied in the response or the message to the school board.
Right.
The fact is there's a lot of things that we do that if we just took a step back and we said, I think this is going on and this is impacting the way that the child experiences school, then we should have a consultation, a conference with the parents and say, hey, this is what we see going on. What do you want us to do?
Mm.
If they say, okay, let's explore this, let's go through with it, then we can figure that out and we can take that journey together.
So I guess that brings up an interesting point. So in this instance, it seems to be pretty obvious that the parents have polar opposite views of what's going on. So you bring in both parents. Let's say you've got both parents in there, right? Let's say they did the right thing here and they did
Mm-hmm.
include both parents. And you've got one person that says, I want you to stop doing what you're doing. And you got another parent that says, continue on. What do you do there?
That's an issue between the two parents, and there's always going to be that, right?
Yeah.
In every marriage, there's conflict.
Sure.
There's things that have to be worked out, and if you can't work them out, that's what ends up in divorce. Unfortunately, that's something that if you can't agree on it, there's some legal action that's going to have to be taken that are either included in or implied in or clarified in custody orders. As yeah. It's a mess. But the point where I was headed with this is if we are to affirm the policy that we should create this position of trust and a positive supportive environment, it can't just be I'm going to support you however it is, because not all things that you want to do as a child are positive, right?
Mm.
But we look at the school's position, and understandably, most of what they do is focused on the child. But I'm going to tell you right now, especially as a parent, as a grandparent, as somebody who's dealt with a lot of this stuff in my career, you cannot have a truly positive, supportive, trust environment if you don't include the parents in all of that.
Yep.
If you are doing things that you think you have a right to do and it is against the parent and what the parent wishes, that parent is not going to trust whatever you say.
Yeah. That's for sure.
So it's no longer a partnership, it is adversarial. And it doesn't take much for it to become more adversarial and for that person who is the focus of this relationship to spread a message of distrust throughout the district. I will tell you that I think I've told you this before. One of my first jobs as a school safety director was to correct the relationship between the community and the high schools. Because there was an incident at one high school, as far as I could investigate in the short amount of time I had, was probably handled correctly. However, the way that it was communicated was not good. And it caused a single parent to form a parent organization that essentially caused havoc at the three high schools in my district of distrust.
Yeah.
Saying, look, they can't handle this. This is a small thing. They can't handle this. They can't handle these tougher things. Our kids are not safe going to this school. There's all kinds of things that are going, and they couldn't handle this correctly. And when they went to the principal at the time, he ended up getting demoted and transferred. But that wasn't enough because the district didn't communicate the steps that they were or wouldn't, but it just took a communications. But it was one parent who created an organization that had well over 100 parents who were active in all of the high schools. All it was a communication issue, and they lost trust. And so I had to, I literally had a meeting with the organizer and had coffee with her once a week. And it took about 3 weeks, 3 meetings. And I said, hey, this is what we're doing. And she goes, okay. And then It was just a check-in. Hey, do you have any concerns? Nope. This is the type of stuff that can get out of control very, very quickly. And it impacts mental health. It impacts how somebody interacts. Do you think this guy is ever going to trust this district again?
No.
No.
No way.
No way.
Definitely
And,
not.
he's vowed to, the only threat that he made was, there was no threat of violence. I'm going to make sure that you guys never hold public office again.
Yeah, in any sense, basically.
In any sense. I'm going to be at all of your rallies. If you think your terms are over now and you decide you want to run for office somewhere else, I'm going to be the person who's against you forever because you failed to protect my child here. Yeah, I mean, that's a thing.
Yeah.
It's a thing. And I don't know why we're not really addressing what it is that we are doing to our families as a school profession, right?
I mean, it's just like, would you rather have families on your side or against you? I mean, it's kind of an easy decision there, but so let's talk about mental health. Let's define
do
that. So this should be interesting because neither one of us are, therapists or mental health specific experts. So
Right.
I guess we'll talk about it from the school safety perspective.
Yeah, so I'm not an expert. I did take one psychology class in college.
Hey, so did I.
One. I didn't do very well in it.
That was a weird class.
Yeah.
Why is every psychology professor like really weird?
Weird is outside the norm, right?
He made me really uncomfortable.
Yeah, so they're not weird in their circles. Here's the deal. This is a part of that conversation that I had with a respected colleague of mine. And they were saying these two terms aren't meeting the definition that we use. So the problem is, and this is why I call it undefinable. Mental health is undefinable.
Yeah.
It's subjective. And
I feel like it's like even more undefinable than bullying.
Let me say this. If you were to talk to a mental health professional, they have a very, very strict, in fact, they have a book that helps you define and apply that definition to your use case, right?
I just feel like there's so many variables, know?
Yeah. The issue comes in, and I don't disagree with this issue that he has, is we are labeling almost every adverse behavior as being a mental health issue. All of these kids coming out of COVID, they've all been impacted and have, mental health issues skyrocketed. Little Jimmy isn't turning in his math homework. He's got a mental health. He's stressed. Has this mental health issue. To full-on clinical diagnosis of mental health issues. And mental health is a catch-all for some very specific diagnoses. I don't disagree with that. The problem is how do we look at both being bullied and mental health, and how do we apply it to a school safety perspective? And that becomes the issue. And I'm not trying to define mental health. I have zero intent to define it, but it must be considered when we are addressing school safety. Victimization, as we talked about, I believe on our last podcast, is at all-time high. Being bullied is the universal excuse for why I'm doing something or not doing something. And same with mental health. Mental health is, I'm stressed, I have depression, I have all of these things. Well, have you been diagnosed? No. Why do you think this? Well, because I looked them up and this is what I have. The problem comes in with, I don't care what the diagnosis is. I don't care whether or not somebody's been bullied or victimized. I care. But what really concerns me is how it manifests itself. What are the actions that are taken? And what can I do to prevent those actions from being violent and harming other people or themselves, right?
Yeah.
If somebody's been bullied to the point that they believe that the only way out of this is either violence and or suicide, I don't care whether or not what they believed happened or what happened to them they believed was bullied, but it doesn't meet my definition. It has zero impact on how I look at that. Some of the problems and some of the impacts that we're experiencing now is there are so many people who believe they were bullied and or they have mental health issues, and whether or not they do or not, I don't care. That doesn't impact how I address school safety. Their behavior is. So if they're exhibiting these behaviors, then that concerns me. We talked a little bit about this in the last one, and that is based on evidence. We know that these people weren't. There is no evidence that they were bullied. There is no evidence that they had any mental health issues. There's no evidence. To me, that's a statement that in the absence of that doesn't prove anything, because we know that our schools are not reporting every act. We know that our schools are horrible at identifying or dealing with acts of being bullied. And I just gave you an example in our discussion of, do you think this guy feels like he was being bullied by the school or the school district? The answer to that was yes.
Yeah.
But if we were to look at the strict definition of that or the Cambridge dictionary definition, might not apply. Are we documenting that evidence? How do we search that in 20 years from now to come back and say, oh, he was victim? How do we figure that out? I think that making those conclusions are not realistic for us. So how do we deal with it, right? The issue for me is when we talk about threat and behavior assessments, and we look at what do we need to do to address those, and why I advocate for threat assessments on a lot of different things, and most of us would say, no, that's silly. And I understand workload, but there's different levels of threat assessments. I talked to you about the first grader and the fourth grader incident that I had where there was a threat made by a first grader towards a fourth grader who wouldn't return a kickball. They asked me what they should do, and I said, do a threat assessment. And they go, are you kidding? No, because we misunderstand the purpose of a threat assessment. The threat assessment is essentially a behavioral assessment where we're trying to determine if there is a threat, and if there is one, what is the best action that we can take. If there is not, is there something else going on? This is the behavior side of it. To identify the behavior and whether or not an intervention is warranted. And if so, what's the appropriate intervention at the appropriate level? It's not always going to look at violence, but this is where we start with worst case scenario. Does this concern tend to lead towards somebody acting out in violence towards themselves or towards others in the school? If the answer to that is no, then we have to look in another direction. But if the answer is yes, then we have to continue down that path, and we have to figure out what's the proper intervention, how are we going to prevent this from happening, how are we going to mitigate its impact if it does happen, and so forth. When we look at determining, it doesn't matter to me if they were bullied or not. I'm just saying, if we are to take it for face value that when somebody says that just shut up your school, when somebody says in response to the question, why did you do this? I've been bullied all my life. I've tried to get help and I can't. There's no other way out. This is what I'm going to do. If we don't take that for face value, then we're missing the emotional side of the reasoning. It may not meet strict definitions, but we're going to address something. And if we don't identify and address bullying early on, we're missing a potential. We're missing the opportunity to solve something, to resolve something, to address something. The amount of bullying that is going on in our schools is severely underestimated. And I think some of it is because we're trying to apply a strict definition to half of the equation who doesn't understand what the definition is.
So are you suggesting that we just remove defining bullying altogether? Would that be helpful?
Nope.
No?
Nope. Here's what we do in schools. We are in such fear of labeling things and people that we choose not to act. We choose not to do something in fear of labeling somebody or something.
Yeah.
Taking a definition away, then you're taking the ability to determine what is happening. Just understand that there is a definition out there of what bullying is. Understand that I'm not an expert. That's why I came up with my own definition, is because I need guidance for Kelly to determine what I consider bullying. A lot of people agree with me. So it's not just some random idea. It's through experience and knowledge and so forth. It is something that you have to have as guidance. But bullying doesn't necessarily mean that you need to label somebody as a bully, but they've engaged in unacceptable behavior.
So it's like in that scenario of the one first grader,
fourth grader,
saying something to the fourth grader.
Yep. She said, "I'm going to kill you.
Yeah.
If you don't give me my ball back, I'm going to kill you."
They probably looked at the first grader as a bully, but it started out as being a victim, and just it's like a response to being a victim.
Mm-hmm. The report was, you need to expel this first grader out of school because she threatened to kill my daughter. And so I said, when I get the report, "Hey, Kelly, what should I do?" And I asked for the circumstances, and it was a group of first graders were playing kickball, and they kicked the ball into the area where a bunch of fourth graders were, and they got tired of it. And one said, "I'm not giving you your ball back." One first grader walked over and said, give me the ball back or I'm going to kill you." And fourth grader turned and ran to the yard duty and reported it, likely as she should have. But this was all centered around the first grader. The fourth grader is first acting. She had no authority to keep that ball, but it irritated her, so she kept it and used her position of power. Older, much more physically present. I mean, older and bigger, and has a bunch of older and bigger friends.
Yeah.
And so they said, "We're not giving it." Why? Because I don't have to. Because I'm bigger and stronger than you are. That is a position of power. So trying to get her, the younger one, from a position of power to do something that the younger one doesn't want to do. In order to take that power back, that first grader turned the tables and one-upped her and said, "Okay, if you don't give it back, I'm going to kill you." Yeah. Right? Escalated, and that escalated very quickly, right? Is that something that a first grader should be saying or even thinking about? No. But the fact of the matter is when I got it, she was the focus of the action, not the fourth grader. Because the fourth grader was saying, "I am the victim here." And I said, "So do a threat assessment on both people." "Why? She's the victim here." I says, She's the instigator. If you want to break the violence circle or the bullying cycle, you have to address both behaviors. You can't just say, okay, first grader, you're the one that made the threat, so you need to pay your dues. You're going to get disciplined. Do you think that's going to create a trust and positive environment for that first grader? No, right? So you have to address both behaviors. And you have to address the fourth grader and her behavior and saying, hey, look at this is not correct behavior. If you had a problem, you should have went to the yard duty and let the yard duty attendant let them deal with it. But you chose to take this into your own hands, and that's not. You can see how that went bad very quickly. So
I don't know if there's anything more you wanted to touch on with defining mental health.
I just get back to it's defined by the person or the person who's impacted by it. Because a mental health issue is,
and it's so close to like a behavioral issue. It can quickly turn into,
but it's defined by the observer. It's defined by the person who's impacted by it. It's defined by so many different things that it's hard to really say.
I think probably your main point is that you can't wait for one of either the mental health issues or the bullying issues to get to someone's definition in order to address it.
What my main point is we're not mental health professionals.
Right.
And so,
I mean, there might be a mental health professional in school.
If we're not going to address something because we don't believe that it meets the technical definition of mental health issue, we're waiting too long. What's the behavior? And does that behavior have the potential for impacting the safety and security of my school? That's my main point, is don't wait for a definition. I don't care. I've never looked up the definition of a mental health. I've dealt with a lot of mental health issues in my day, people who were suffering from mental health. But if we're trying to say, I don't think this is technically a mental health, we're going to choose not to deal with issues because they don't meet the strict definition. One of the issues that are happening is we're also allowing people who are, I'll get pushback for this, who are fundamentally lazy and they don't want to deal with something. So they're going to be very quick to say, that's a mental health issue. And they're going to either ignore it or move it on to somebody else. And if they move it on to somebody else, I'm actually okay with that. Because
if it's the right person, sure.
Yeah. And so this is where we have to give kind of a broad definition for the masses. Our first line teachers are not mental health professionals. They're not bullying experts. They're not experienced enough to understand all of the impacts that either one of those issues have on somebody 10 years from now, 15 years from now. But they are able to do this, generally classify as I think that's kind of bully behavior. I'm going to either address this personally on a very low level. What are you doing? Holding somebody accountable, right? What are you doing? Stop doing that. If this happens again, I'm sending you to the principal's office or the guidance counselor or whoever you send that to in a school. If they think this is generally a mental health issue, depression, psychological issues, behavior issues, anger issues, those types of things, then they can say, maybe this person needs some help. Let's point them in the right direction. I'm not telling you have to deal with anything, but you need to point them. Our teachers are our first line identifiers of issues within the schools. I wish I kept this. I don't think I did. I saw one the other day because we talked about the role bus drivers play. And it was a story about a kid who was super outgoing, happy all the time. And when they started school for the first year or so, everything was great. But then they started to see a gradual decline in behavior, engagement, willingness to even get on the bus. And the
Wow.
bus driver noticed this as well. And the bus driver had that child sit right behind her while she's driving, and she would reach back and just hold the kid's hand. She knew something was going on. And at one point, she had enough and took all the kids back to school, I think it was, and said, "This has got to stop. Your kids are bullying these kids. Your kids are engaging, and this has got to stop. We're not going to wait till something happens. We're not going to, address one at a time. You parents are going to correct this. The school's going to correct it, and so forth." So the bottom line is you have to take action. You have to observe. You have to point them in the right direction. You have to take some sort of action. You can't just, I've said it many, many times, and it was reaffirmed in this little story. You can no longer say this is just kids being kids. Like, we're in different generations. I don't even, I'm the tail end of the baby boomers. I don't even know we're in the 6th generation. Each generation is different.
Yeah.
The impacts, the influences, so forth. And the struggles are different. Some of the behaviors are the same, but they're better at it. They've elevated. They've learned things. Kids learn things at a quicker rate. They have access to more information. So it really is trying to identify and point them to people who can take some sort of action. So whether it's bullying or mental health, it doesn't matter to me. But the real reason that we do assessments is not to say, yep, he's violent or not. What you're trying to do is there an issue? And what's the best action? It's problem solving. Right? What's the problem? Behavior. What's the cause of the problem? What are your resources? What's your plan to deal with it? Figure out what your plan is. Implement your plan and work through it. It's simple problem solving. And if you're not capable of solving that problem, one of your resources is, I have a problem. Here's my resource: counseling, mental health professionals, psychologists, a trusted adult, a parent. Hey, parent, let's get this going. This is a partnership.
Comes full circle there. It's like you
Right?
see something,
do something.
Maybe talking to the parent might be your best route.
Right? And if the parent can't resolve it, then saying, "Hey, what are you doing? Let's have that conversation. What are you doing? Is there anything that what else can we do to correct this? Maybe it's more than we thought it was."
On that, I saw something where someone made the point where, maybe the teachers don't always have the time to actually reach out to a parent, that maybe an admin actually would have more time to do that. Do you have a recommendation or a preference on which role is actually communicating things like this to a parent?
Teachers have a duty to communicate with the parent. Admin has a duty to communicate with a parent. The issue is, it's always better to resolve any issue at the lowest level possible. The assumption that an admin has, an administrative staff member of a school has more time than a teacher is probably false.
Okay.
And the reason I'm saying that is, and this is just Kelly logic and observations, a teacher deals with 30 kids. Admin is dealing with issues within the whole school.
Gotcha.
If you're resolving things at a lower level, they're generally smaller issues. if you're dealing with them at the administrative level, they're usually larger issues that take longer to resolve and are more time intensive. If my deputies had a problem and they came to me as a manager, as a lieutenant or a commander, and they came to me and said, "Hey, I have this problem." Okay, what's your solution? Well, I'm telling you, this is your problem. It's not my problem. It's your problem. I said, what have you done to deal with this? Right? So this is one of the things that I say. I'm an advocate for you solving your problems. Don't bring me your problems if you can solve them. Never come to me with a problem that you don't have a solution for. Don't come to me with something that you should be dealing with.
I've always kind of had that thinking at any job that I've had, that if I encounter some problem of any sort, and I feel that it needs to be communicated to a manager, I usually will have some idea of what I think a solution could be. Like, hey, here's a problem. Here's what I think a solution would be. What do you think?
If you want me to help you work through that, I don't know what the solution is. Okay, let's work through the problem, right? Yeah. And the problem solving model. Let's work through that, and so that when you come to me the next time, you'll understand what the expectation is. And the only time that you should come to me is you've tried to resolve it and you can't. I always jokingly, I said, it was semi-jokingly because it was fact. But the way that I said this, it was, a lot of people took it as a joke. And that was, your job is to make sure that I don't have to do my job.
Yeah.
Because if you force me to do my job, you're not necessarily going to like the answer or the way that I do my job, because my job is different than yours. This is why it's best to resolve the problem at the lowest level. And I never wanted to be the excuse or the reason where somebody said, I don't know, I told the commander, this is what it wasn't my fault. Wait a second. All you're doing is, one, being lazy. Yeah. And two, you're trying to blame somebody else for a decision that you should have made.
Yeah. That might have gone better if you had just tackled it earlier instead of taking the time to go through all these channels. And it kind of speaks to what we were talking about before. It's for addressing these things earlier on instead of letting them get bigger.
It killed me as a deputy, as a supervisor, as a manager, the number of times where people spent an inordinate amount of time trying not to do something, when if they had just taken care of it, they would have used probably less time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've literally seen deputies work for a couple of hours trying not to take a report that would have taken them maybe a half hour to take the information and write the report. And then they're going to come to me and say, hey, Commander, hey, Lieutenant, here, this is, no. Well, yep, okay. Solve it.
Yeah.
Don't try to make me the bad guy, because if you have to, I don't mind being the bad guy, because that's part of my job. But don't just come just so you don't have to be the bad guy, because that's part of your job as well. That's what we get paid a lot of money for. We always say somebody wants to be a cop or a fireman or whatever until they have to do cop or fireman stuff. It's not as easy as it appears. But it's the same way as a lot of people want to be supervisors, managers, whatever, until they have to do the responsibility of those. It's no different when we're talking about teachers and so forth. If they have an easy way out, they'll take it. I had principals contact me and say, hey, we have an issue with this kid. And I said, okay, that sounds like a disciplinary problem. And they said, yeah, but he's got an IEP or a 504. Okay. Well, we can't discipline because they have this. That's not true. Well, if we discipline them, then there's going to be a manifestation hearing. The manifestation hearing is such that if the issue that they're causing is a manifestation of their disability, then you can't discipline them. I said, yep, I get it. I understand the rules. I understand the law. But that doesn't mean you can't discipline them. That means that once you discipline them or suggest discipline, that you have to go through this process.
It's easier not to discipline, so you don't have to go through the process.
That's right. I don't, because there might be a possibility that it's going to show up in a manifestation hearing. Okay, but that's not for you to decide. Still hold them accountable so that they know. And if it continues to be a problem, then we can figure it out. We'll figure out something else. But if they have an excuse, and oftentimes they will take that excuse and run with it and say, we're not going to do this because, no, do it. Your job is to do it. Don't make me come in and say, okay, this is what we're going to do, when you should have disciplined them. And then somebody else down the road would say, hey, Kelly, what about this? Okay, let's look at it. Let's see how we can deal with it. To close it up, I think we need to look at the behaviors. We need to act upon the behaviors. We're not the experts in what bullying is. We're not the experts in what mental health issues are. Act on the behaviors and how they impact the school safety and the security of your school. And we can label it down the road somewhere. Some professional can do it. We just have to figure out what's going on now. We can't wait for all of the information, all of the diagnoses that may or may not be there. And oftentimes what we have to deal with, our information, is we have to take the information we have at face value and make a decision with the best information we have. And in fact, I think that's a critical piece of managing incidences, is not having all the information, but being able to make good quality decisions with the information you have.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.